So how did
But
you?
At least I'm not dropping names.
I've heard. Well, I was about to start dropping names because I've heard a rumor that you work with Lorrie Morgan and some shows with Ronnie Millsap. So how did you go from audio engineer? Because when I think audio engineer, I think of a guy sitting in a studio, but you're doing like live is your thing.
So I did live, and when I was working weekday and some weekends, I mean, even though I was DJing, I worked for some sound companies. There was Blue Audio in Chicago.
Right.
There was another place I went called Andy's Pro Hire. They had a retail store, but they had a rental division and a lot of backline. And I learned a lot of backline stuff, synthesizers, guitars, amps, Hammond, Leslie speakers and all that kind of stuff, knowing that there's oil in those things. You can't tilt them. Knowing how to repair Leslie motors and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
So when I went to audio engineering school, it was mostly studio stuff. But because I had this background, and then AV stuff is, a whole nother thing. I mean, that's video as well. And, but it's kind of simple and all that. Mm-hmm. So what happened was the thing didn't work out with the girl. That's a whole long story, but she wasn't coming back and I was done. That's a whole nother thing. But in that, it was like, there were a lot of changes going on at the arena. I see you laughing at me. There was a lot of changes going on. That's all right.
They don't always work out. That's okay.
And it got to a point where there was so much chaos going on at the arena and it was ridiculous. That I said, you know what? I'm not married. I don't have any kids. I've always wanted to go out on the road. I'm going to quit. And I timed it where I got 3-4 extra paychecks and all my holiday stuff. Mm-hmm. And even the HR guy that was signing me out or however you do it corporate, he was like, it's almost like you planned this. I went, I did. Yeah. And so I walked out the door and within a few weeks, I'm out on the road with Kings of Leon.
Oh, that's cool.
Exactly, and then they were opening for U2. And then I got sent home I went home from that tour. And 3 days later, I'm meeting Steve Earle's brother, Patrick, in the parking lot of a hamburger stand and given a ticket to fly to Italy.
Oh, wow. And
I joined a tour with that. And so the funny thing about that too was, obviously I actually went up for a gig as an LD, which I don't know anything about lights except how to flip a switch and it's on and off, But my friend was doing monitors for Steve Earle and he said, hey, we're going to come out with us, man. You can do these lights, just do some colors and whatever,
Yeah.
So I go and I meet with Steve's brother, Patrick, and his manager at the time. And I was like, I was honest. Look, I'm an audio guy. I don't know anything about lights. Mm-hmm. I don't really want to do it. I'm only here because Dave sent me, and I walked out the door, but they knew that I was an audio guy. So Dave quit I don't know what happened. And when I got home back to Nashville from the Kings of Leon thing, they called me up and 2 days later, I got can you come do monitors for Steve Earle?
Wow.
Here's a ticket to Italy. So I go over there and obviously they told Steve that I was from REM and he walks out and he goes, I'm Steve Earle. You're Neil. I'm going to be playing mandolin. Don't mix it like an REM record. And I just stood there, paused. And I went, okay.
Yeah.
So somebody told him I was from, somebody said I was from Athens.
That's a really cool. You said you weren't going to drop names, but like if you're going to have two to start with, those are pretty good starts. Like that's that's a good.
I was over the moon. And
that's amazing.
So even that tour, that first one, we went down to Australia.
Wow.
Played New Zealand, played, all over Europe. And I get home and I jump on Lorrie Morgan and was her monitor engineer. And she did a bunch of shows with Ronnie Millsap. And it was great. Cool. And it was constant. And
Yeah, that's cool.
It was good. And then after her, I went back out with Steve Earle. The album was called The Revolution Starts Now.
Right.
And then came home and I went out with a band called They Might Be Giants out of New York, out of Brooklyn, who've been around since the 80s.
Right.
And it was and so then Steve put this record together with John King of the Dust Brothers, which kind of was a little loop based, and it's called Washington Square Serenade. And he was like, how am I going to pull this off with like loop pedals and drum machines, or, cause it had this, funky beat to it. And it was his brother that said, Neil used to be a DJ.
Neil's a DJ.
Why don't you get him out.
Yeah, exactly.
So I came out and I started scratching and dropping beats.
Yeah.
And Steve's playing dobro.
Oh, that is awesome.
Resonator and banjo and bouzouki and mandolin. And so he would come out and he would do, I don't know, 8 songs, just him. And here was this table, and it's just him solo. And then all of a sudden I'd walk out and go chicka, 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 boom. And he'd start playing to it. And the crowd would go, like, what in the world?
That is something. So you were in the band. That's something.
But I was also doing monitors on the side of the stage.
Yeah, just on the side.
I was doing 2 roles and getting paid for one.
That's really
But
nice.
I remember there was a kid in Atlanta. We were playing in Atlanta. My folks came out for that. And he was like, I just wanted to shake your hand and meet you. I got to be honest, I've been a Steve Earle fan for a long time, and I thought I was going to hate you. But I really dug it. And I was like, well, I want you to know that I didn't force myself on Steve. He brought me here.
Right.
So if you didn't like it, you can go talk to him about it. It's not my band. I brought him up,
So I'm told there's a story about Billy Gibbons and Steve Earle that I'm supposed to get you to.
Okay.
Enthrall me with.
I was telling your lovely missus some stories in sort of a pre-production. So the way I heard it was Steve was recording at Electric Ladyland, which was Jimi Hendrix's old studio in New York. And there's a compressor limiter called an 1176. It was by Uri. Okay. And which is made now by Universal Audio. And Uri was Universal Recording Engineers Incorporated or something like that. It was by Bill Putnam. And they're very, very famous. There's the black face and the silver face.
Right.
And they're called 1176s. So this guy comes down the hall and he's got like 5 of them on a dolly, on a hand truck. And he comes to the studio and he says, would any of you be interested in an 1176? And Steve Earle loves them. And he's like, I've got 4 of them. But Billy Gibbons is down the hall. You could ask him. So this runner goes down there instead of taking all the hand cart down there. And Billy Gibbons comes back and he goes, and he looks at him and he goes, I'll be right. And he gets a piece of paper and a pen and he's looking at the back and he goes, I'll be right back. So he goes down the hall and Billy comes back and goes, I'll take this one and this one. and the guy goes, okay. And Steve goes, why those 2? And he goes, well, I called my voodoo lady in New Orleans and read her the serial numbers. And she said, those are the 2 I need to get.
No way. I thought you were going to say he called like the manufacturer or something. He called a voodoo lady.
Yeah. And Holly, what was her name?
Marie Laveau.
Marie Laveau. That's wild, isn't it?
That's pretty wild. Yeah. I've never met anybody that had a voodoo lady. Not on speed dial.
Right. Let me call my voodoo lady.
That's something.